Greetings, philosophers. The stream this morning was a complete fail. There's some technology issues going on, and I don't have time. I don't have time to troubleshoot because this is just my morning quick read time. I will check it out later. I'll just hit record and upload the recording for you guys. I struggled to pick the next thing to read. I figured, we've been on Plato. First of all, I kind of felt bad about not finishing Phaedo, but then I didn't because I didn't want to read any more of it. So then I was like, well, we'll just go on to Plato's Republic. You know, that's a big deal sort of book, and I haven't read it in a long time, but I just wasn't feeling it. And so then I, realized that Marcus Aurelius's Meditations is one of my top 5 most powerful, most life-changing, amazing reads ever. And I try and read it every couple years, and it's actually been 3.5 or 4 years since I've read it. And so just the thought of reading it got me super excited. But then I was like, oh wait, when I read it, it's kind of a shorter book. It's a shorter read. So when I read it, oftentimes in the past, I've binge read it in a day. And that doesn't really fit my morning read times. But then I decided to do it because in the past, when you binge read it, it's it hits you with so much at once that it's kind of hard to really digest and to appreciate each bit of wisdom in it. So it's actually going to be kind of a cool new thing for me to read it in small chunks and have little bits to think about at a time. So I'm excited about it. I'm looking forward to this. Read. Marcus Aurelius, and there's a specific. I have multiple versions of this, just because it's amazing. So the edition I'm going to be reading, and I'll have a link in the description to this specific translation. This is a new translation by, I think it's Gregory Hayes, I believe is the guy that actually did the translation, or at least that's the version. Anyway, I'll link in the description if you guys want to get this version, which I think this is the best translation. Also, I really like his introduction in this book, and so I'm going to actually read the introduction, even though it's somewhat lengthy. It might actually take us a day or two of these morning things just to get through the introduction, but it really sets up this person, Marcus Aurelius, this emperor of Rome that ruled for 40 years or something. He's known as the last good emperor of Rome. There were only 4 good emperors of Rome. He was the final one. And he was a Stoic. Anyway, I don't want to give an introduction if I'm about to read an introduction that talks about him, but that's just to say the introduction does a great job at bringing to life this person that existed, and talking about where he came from, how he came up, and how he lived. And man, this guy suffered some just repeated over and over tragedies in his life. He had over 10 children, and I think only one of them survived. He outlived his wife. Just a really, he had a lot of tragedies in his life. And this book this is the last intro thing that I'll say. This is not him writing to other people. Most of the other philosophical writings are students of philosophers copying down the lectures that the philosophers give, or the interactions that they have, or making up, in the case of Plato, making up fake conversations to espouse philosophical ideas. This is this dude's journal to himself. He did not intend us to read this. And with me doing my bullet journal plus my, just journaling every day, that has a special extra meaning to me. Kind of feels like an invasion of privacy, because I would never want somebody reading things I wrote in my journal. But man, it is. Anyway, I'm going to shut up now. Let's get started. So I'm actually going to read through the introduction by Gregory Hayes before we actually start. And like I said, that'll probably take a couple days of these 15-minute things to get through. So I am super excited about this. Sorry if you guys were enjoying Phaedo. We're moving on. So here we go. Introduction by Gregory Hayes. It's got a quote at the top. Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. That says, states will never be happy until rulers become philosophers, or philosophers become rulers. That's a quote from Plato, The Republic, that I was thinking about reading instead of this, which I will definitely get back to reading. But let's continue. Marcus Aurelius is said to have been fond of quoting Plato's dictum, and those who have written about him have rarely been able to resist applying it to Marcus himself. And indeed, if we seek Plato's philosopher king in the flesh, we could hardly do better than Marcus, the ruler of the Roman Empire for almost 2 decades, and the author of the immortal Meditations. Yet the title is one that Marcus himself would surely have rejected. He never thought of himself as a philosopher. He would have claimed to be, at best, a diligent student and a very imperfect practitioner of a philosophy developed by others. As for the imperial throne, that came almost by accident. When Marcus Annius Verus was born in AD 121, bystanders might have predicted a distinguished career in the Senate or the imperial administration. They could hardly have guessed that he was destined for the imperial purple, or seen in their mind's eye the lonely bronze horseman whose unpraised hand greets us from the Capitol hill in Rome across 2,000 years. That's important. To put this in place in time, it's hard when we're reading things that happened so long ago. So we were just reading Plato. Plato was a student of Socrates. So Socrates lived, obviously, and died before Plato. And so it was basically like Socrates, then Plato, Diogenes, for the people that know who that is, followed by Aristotle. Then you had like Epicurus. You had, Epictetus, which is another one that I'll definitely read. I've only read a little bit of him in the past, so I'm looking forward to reading Epictetus again. But Epictetus lived like right before Marcus Aurelius. Like I think Marcus would have been a kid when Epictetus died, and I think Marcus was a student of all of these people. Seneca as well came before. So in a way, we're basically jumping forward from the Plato work to this work, to this book by about 500 years. There's a 500-year difference in what we're writing. Marcus, in a way, and I don't think this is controversial to say, I think Marcus would be the ultimate student of all of the philosophers that came before him. So we're jumping so far forward that we're kind of seeing the result of all of the philosophy that came previous to him, especially when it comes to the Stoics, which is awesome. Okay, where was I? I just wanted to place him in the timeline of history so we knew where we were now, because we're way far forward. Marcus sprang from a distinguished enough family. The year of his birth coincided with his grandfather's second tenure of the consulship, in theory Rome's highest office, though now of largely ceremonial importance. And it was to be his grandfather who brought him up, for his father died when he was very young. Marcus makes reference in the Meditations to his father's character as he remembered it or heard it from others, but his knowledge must have been more from stories than from actual memories. Of the remainder of his childhood and his early adolescence, we know little more than can be gleaned from Meditations. The biography of him in the so-called Historia Augusta, a curious and unreliable work of the late 4th century, probably based on a lost series of lives by the 3rd century biographer Marius Maximus, tells us that he was a serious child, but also that he loved boxing, wrestling, running, and falconry, that he was a good ball player, and that he loved to hunt. None of these are surprising occupations in an upper-class youth. Book 1 of Meditations offers glimpses of Marcus's schooling, and we can fill out the picture by what is known of upper-class education generally at this period. His first instructors, like the unnamed teacher mentioned in Meditations 1.5, were probably slaves, from whom he would have mastered the rudiments of reading and writing. At a later stage, he would have been handed over to private tutors to be introduced to literature, especially, no doubt, Virgil's great epic, the Aeneid. Aeneid? But literature served only as a preparation for the real goal. This was rhetoric. The key to an active political career under the Empire, as it had been under the Republic. Under the supervision of a trained rhetor, Marcus would have begun with short exercises before progressing to full-scale practice declamations in which he would have been asked to defend one side or another in imaginary law cases, or to advise a prominent historical figure at a turning point in his career. Should Caesar cross the Rubicon? Should Alexander turn back at the Indus? Why or why not? Such training was conducted in Greek as well as Latin. Since at least the beginning of the 1st century BC, the Roman upper classes had been essentially bilingual, and Marcus's spoken and written Greek would have been as fluent as the French of a 19th century Russian aristocrat or the Chinese of a Heian Japanese courtier. Marcus would have read Homer's Iliad and Odyssey and the tragedies of Euripides side by side with the Aeneid. I need to look up how to pronounce that. And studied the speeches of the great Athenian orator Demosthenes as intensively as those of the Roman statesman Cicero. It was Greek writers and artists who constituted the intellectual elite at the capital, when in later life the emperor conversed with his court physician Galen. He would have done so in the latter's native tongue. Above all, Greek remained overwhelmingly the language of philosophy. In the late Republic and early Empire, writers like Lucretius, Cicero, and Seneca had worked to create a philosophical literature in Latin, with notable success. But the great thinkers, Plato, Aristotle, Theophrastus, Zeno, Chrysippus, Epicurus, etc., had all been Greeks. Serious philosophical investigation required a familiarity with the language they wrote in, and the terminology they developed. That Marcus composed his own meditations in Greek is natural enough. In 137, when Marcus was 16, a crucial event took place. The reigning emperor, Hadrian, was childless. An illness had brought him near to death a year previously, and it was clear that he would not live forever. Hadrian owed his throne to his adoption by his predecessor and distant relative, Trajan. Following Trajan's example, Hadrian had designated the distinguished aristocrat Lucius Ceionius Commodus to succeed him. In 137, however, Ceionius died unexpectedly, and Hadrian was forced to cast about for a new successor. His choice fell on the childless senator Antonius, whom he selected with the proviso that Antoninus... God, man... Maybe I shouldn't be the one doing these readings. Should in turn adopt Marcus, his nephew by marriage, along with Ceionius' son Lucius Verus, then aged 7. Marcus took on the family name of his adopted father, becoming Marcus Aurelius Antoninus. Hadrian's death the following year left Marcus first in line for the throne. His education and that of the younger Verus were now matters of still greater concern, and it is clear that no expense was spared. For training in Greek rhetoric, he was entrusted to Herodes, Atticus, and fabulously wealthy Athenian rhetorician who's a sorry guys. For training in Greek rhetoric, he was entrusted to Herodes Atticus, a fabulously wealthy Athenian rhetorician whose tempestuous relations with his family, fellow citizens, and the imperial court itself would have furnished ample material for a soap opera. I read to my kids last night, and I'm reading these kids' books with really simple words, and then we hit, fabulously wealthy Athenian rhetorician whose tempestuous relations, like, woohoo! Wake up, brain, wake up! His instructor in Latin oratory was Marcus Cornelius Fronto, a prominent rhetorician from Cirta in North Africa. By an accident of fate, many of Fronto's letters to Marcus have survived, and they illustrate the close relationship between student and teacher. They also suggest Fronto's regret at seeing Marcus move away from rhetoric to delve ever more deeply into philosophy. The first book of the Meditations pays tribute to a number of philosophers from whom Marcus learned, both formally and informally, and he is likely to have studied with or listened to many others. Marcus would have learned much outside the classroom as well, for training in legal and political matters and informal apprenticeship bound aristocratic youths to older public figures. Men like Junius Rusticus, whose influence Marcus chronicles in 1.7. But the single greatest influence was surely Marcus's adopted father, Antonius Pius. Marcus would have watched as Antoninus, that's wrong. Antoninus, man. Antoninus received embassies. Marcus would have watched as Antoninus? I'm going with Antoninus. Marcus would have watched as Antoninus received embassies, tried legal cases, and dictated letters to his deputies. Meanwhile, Marcus's own position as heir apparent was signaled in various ways. In 140, that's a year, 140 AD, he served as consul at the age of 19, and would serve again in 145. In the same year, he married Antoninus's daughter, Faustina, to whom he pays tribute in Meditations 1.17. Edward Gibbon's History of the Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire describes the reign of Antoninus as furnishing very few materials for history, which is indeed little more than the register of the crimes, follies, and misfortunes of mankind. It furnishes equally little material for Marcus's biography. In the decade and a half between 145 and 161, we learn little of Marcus's occupations, and our only glimpses of his inner development come from his correspondence with Fronto. But the two poles that would govern the remainder of his life, the court and philosophy, seem by this point to be fully established. There is no evidence that Marcus experienced anything like the conversion to philosophy that some ancient figures experienced or affected. But it is clear that by the middle to late 140s, philosophy was becoming increasingly central to his life. On August 31, 161, Antoninus died, leaving Marcus as his sole successor. Marcus immediately acted to carry out what appears to have been Hadrian's original intention, perhaps ignored by Antoninus, by pushing through the appointment of his adopted brother Lucius Verus as co-regent. All right, that's a perfect spot to stop on, because the first thing he did when he got power was basically make his brother co-emperor, so he wasn't by himself. Think about that. Think about that. That's crazy. That's not normal. I hope you guys are as excited about this read as I am. I'm so pumped. It's going to be hard to not keep reading after I'm done streaming, but I'm going to try. I read basically two books at once. So in the mornings I do the short reads, and at some point in the rest of the day I spend an hour reading something solid. And yeah. Anyway, it's gonna be hard to make it not that book. Anyway, so today I was thinking about my habits, because some of them are working well, some of them I'm just repeatedly failing at, and I need to figure that out. So today is going to be a habit review day. I've got a lot of habits that I've been working on. I organize my productivity with the bullet journal. You can find a video of that on the channel. It's called How I Ran Two Companies with a Bullet Journal. And I'm probably going to do an update on it soon, because I've streamlined it even more from that video. I also do these morning, 15-minute philosophy readings. I also do what I call think time, which is, just a 15-minute period where I let myself think about whatever I need to think about that day. I also, every day, try and get 15 minutes of time in the sun. Sunlight does me well in a lot of ways. And being in the IT field, it's easy for me to get hidden away in a cave. And I find that when that happens for long enough, I suffer sort of mentally. And then I also have my book reading time, and then I have my journaling habit. And I also have a cleaning habit. Like I clean one thing a day. Either I clean one thing or I spend one 10 to 15 minute block cleaning a thing every day. And over time, my home and my environment and my spaces that I work in get more and more comfortable and more tranquil of places to be, more orderly. It's a Jordan Peterson thing. I didn't get it from Jordan Peterson, but it's kind of along those same lines. Taking control of your environment and making it more orderly helps me to be a more excellent person. So anyway, I've got a bunch of those habits, and I've been failing, especially on the journaling one lately. And so I just want to kind of reevaluate my habits today. I want to go through each habit. I want to spend a few minutes thinking about each habit. I want to focus on what I appreciate, what effects each of those habits has on my life. And I want to either appreciate those effects or realize that maybe they're not beneficial enough and I need to remove that habit to make time for either another habit or just being more productive in other areas. So I'm going to go through each habit. I'm either going to appreciate it or modify it or eliminate it. It's kind of like this is the final exam day, so to speak. This is the job interview result day for each of my habits to make sure that I'm spending my life wisely and as excellently as possible, because these habits are my method of being a more excellent person. And if I'm not reviewing my habits, I could be wasting my time in the same way that the last hours of Socrates' life was spent debating ghosts. Okay, so I'm still a little upset by that, by Phaedo. Anyway, guys, I'm headed out of city to an event. Today I'm going to be hammock camping at the Solar Punk event near Austin. Tomorrow morning, I have no idea if I'm going to have internet. And if I do, I will totally live stream from my phone and do my reading from there. And if I don't, I will record from my phone and do the reading there and just upload it when I get home. Guys, have a great day.